Our Flap TV debate series on Election 18 continues with the candidates for the 3rd Worcester District for State Representative, which covers the city of Fitchburg and Lunenburg Precinct B. Incumbent State Representative Stephan Hay, the Democrat, and his challenger, Elmer Eubanks Archibald, the Republican. Thank you both for joining us. We're going to get to as many issues as we can in the next half hour, so let us begin. Being one of 160 legislators means you have to set priorities. When it comes to fighting for money for Fitchburg, which would be a higher priority for you? Given the choice, money to fix roads or money to fix schools, and why? Mr. Eubanks.
Well, that's a tough one, trying to make a priority. Everybody keeps complaining about the roads, so the roads would be high on the list, but I know that our schools are in need of a lot of support as well, so I'd probably go schools, then roads.
Okay.
Yeah, I for years have put on my flyers and talked about the fact that I believe that education and public safety are the two main points of service that the government has towards the people in the Commonwealth. So I would have to say education, because education is twofold. One is we need money for the buildings themselves. And I've actually got a bill in that I'll refile in the next session, if I'm lucky enough to be reelected, to put more money towards the school building fund, because many cities and towns, particularly gateway cities and towns, the buildings are in bad shape and need to be taken care of. But we also need to invest more money in, because it's our kids, and our kids are the future. They're the ones who's going to lead our communities, they're going to lead our cities, and they're going to take us into the future. And people talk about education as being the gateway to leveling the playing field, and we have an obligation and responsibility to do that. Another thing that I've advocated for is early childhood education, because everybody talks about those building blocks being so important, and yet early childhood education, we don't pay those people enough money to keep them in the job. So a child who's in school when they're 3 and 4 years old has 6 or 8 different teachers during that time, and there's no continuity. So we need to raise more money for that. So I'd have to say education. I do work with the delegation. I work with the mayor to try to bring more money in for the streets and to fix them. Chapter 90 money has gone up the last 3 years, and that's a good thing. We have a surplus right now, and they're trying to figure out what we'll do with that money in the surplus. And those are the 2 areas that I spoke about in the paper the other day: education and infrastructure for the roads. So those are important topics.
So your last point took the next question right out of my mouth, because I gave you the choice between the Chapter 70 or the Chapter 90, and it sounds like both of you would first go with Chapter 70 and get money towards education. So if that's given the choice, but for your prerogatives, if we have that $1 billion surplus now, so if they sit you down at a table and say, okay, what would you like to see done with this $1 billion? What are your priorities? Where would you like to see specifically money coming back to Fitchburg, other than what we just talked about?
Well, first, I think we'd want to keep some of that funds for a rainy day fund, because when the economy is doing well, we want to keep some of that. But I would try to bring some of that money back to fix the roads as well. And one of our schools here needs it a lot, so we try to bring both to the table, and really fight for that, to try to bring that money back. And I think one of the things that I would like to see is us raise more money for education and actually challenge everybody, even the governor, to say, let's add another penny to that education fund. And if they're spending about a penny per dollar, let's go to 2 pennies. And I think everybody should be able to agree with that and bring that money back here.
Representative Hay?
Yeah, I think that I would advocate for both of them. I happen to agree with my opponent in the fact of the stabilization fund, and I felt very fortunate this past budget we were able to put a substantial amount of money into the stabilization fund, but that doesn't mean that we can't put more there for when the economy does turn and we need it. But I think, as I said, the education and is the #1 priority. But I would like to, if we're going to take the $1 million, the $1 billion, let's not all put it in one place. Let's divide it up in some different areas, but particularly different areas that would help the cities and towns. And we also need to look at the fact that, a city like Fitchburg, when you talk about infrastructure, when you talk about our roads, okay, we have a lot of country roads and we have a lot of hills here in Fitchburg, and the winter season in the plowing beats them up a lot more than roads in, say, Quincy or Braintree or a town like that. And they need to determine a formula that takes those factors into consideration when they're making those allocations for funds. And that's something I talk about at the State House.
Issue 2, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court shot down the proposed so-called fair share ballot initiative, effectively throwing the issue back into the hands of the legislature to see if they have the will to pass a constitutional amendment. Would you support moving Massachusetts to a graduated income tax where people of differing incomes pay different rates? Or do you think we should stick with our flat tax rate, which applies to everybody? Representative Hay.
Right now, I prefer to stay with the flat tax, but I would like the legislature to consider the fair share. I think that people who are making that amount of money have an obligation and a responsibility to put a little bit more into the pot. That was a good chunk of change, and it was a resident initiative that was going to put that on the ballot, and the Supreme Court said that it was written incorrectly. So the legislature can certainly take that up. I will be adamant that if we were to take that up and we were to vote on it, that the money is earmarked for infrastructure and for education, and is not to go into the general fund and to be spent at the discretion of the governor and the legislature. We need to find a way to say this is specifically going here, and this is why. And the other thing we need to make sure that we do, if we do that and we raise that $2.1 billion that they're anticipating, we need to make sure that we don't say, okay, if we're going to divide it in half and each one's going to get, $1 billion. Well, we're not going to give them $1 billion out of the fair share and then take $1 billion away from them what we usually give them in the budget for either of those areas. They need to continue to get the amount that we've been giving them for infrastructure and for education, and that $1 billion needs to be added to that so that we can improve the infrastructure and we can improve the educational system.
Mr. Eubanks, graduated income tax or flat tax?
So I like the flat tax, and being an economist, I see that as we reduce, I'd actually advocate to reduce the tax a little bit so that we actually spread that a little bit more. I think that having a lower tax will probably allow more people to have better jobs. They'll have more investment in the economy. More companies would want to be here in Massachusetts. I think that's one of the challenges we have now. Is we push away a lot of the small businesses and small companies because of the tax. So I would want to have a flat tax, and I would also not want to see. And I know some people say, well, we can tax more of the billionaires, but I think they'll just pack up and leave, and then what are we left with? So I think they should pay their fair share, like everybody else, but at a flat rate as well.
All right, let's jump into the deep end just a little bit for a moment. Speaking of things being thrown back into the hands of the legislature from the courts, the recent appointment of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, preceded by Gorsuch, has some people predicting that Roe versus Wade could be in jeopardy of being overturned. If it is, it would be up to state legislatures around the country to be responsible for writing their own laws state by state. Do you support any restrictions on abortion, and if so, which restrictions would you support, Mr. Eubanks?
Well, I'm not in favor personally of abortion. It's something that religiously I don't believe in. So that puts that right there, right? I think we already have a law that states what it is. It's Roe versus Wade, and that's the law of the land. And I think we should not mess with it, leave it alone. So, but my personal opinion is I don't believe in it. So I think that really puts that.
But if Roe versus Wade is overturned, then the Roe versus Wade doesn't exist anymore, and state legislatures would be writing their own laws. What kind of laws would you like to see written for Massachusetts?
Well, I'd probably have to really consider my own beliefs and what the population wants as well. I mean, I don't believe in it, but I'm also not try to push somebody else's decision on my beliefs on them. So I would probably try to figure a balanced law that protects people's decisions.
Representative Hay.
Hopefully that won't occur, but if that does, I hope that Massachusetts and legislature will protect a woman's choice. It is not for me, you, the legislature, or anybody else to decide what a woman does with her body. That is her choice, and her choice only. She will live with the decisions that they make. They will live with the choices that they make, and they will make them based on information that is none of our business. And I hope that the Commonwealth, if Roe versus Wade were to be overturned, that the Commonwealth would implement those types of protections for women.
Issue 4, as state representative, you will be voting on a proposed land swap that would carve out 85 acres out of Leominster State Forest to expand the Fitchburg Municipal Landfill in exchange for 175 acres of already protected land in Westminster that would be added to state forest property. Would you vote yay or nay on that deal, Representative Hay?
Actually, the mayor of Fitchburg and the selectmen from Westminster asked Representative Harrington, Representative Zlotnick, and myself to file that in the last session, and we did. We weren't able to get it to the floor, but I anticipate that we will be refiling that and trying to bring it to the floor. And I'm glad to do it at the behest of those folks, but I also think it's probably the right thing and the appropriate thing to do. We need to put together a long-term plan regarding waste and trash and recycling and get to it. But right now, if the Fitchburg landfill were to close in 2026, which if we don't make this land swap, that's what's going to occur, that will adversely affect not only Fitchburg, but every city and town in this area, because many of them use that landfill for their waste, and it's going to be much more expensive for them if they have to ship it somewhere else. I do want to make clear, though, that the legislation that we filed, and I expect to file again, when it talks about that land swap of the 85 acres for the 175 acres, okay, that's not saying that occurs. That's saying that it goes to DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, and they will determine whether those two parcels, the 175 acres and the 85 acres, is equal and appropriate to make a swap for. So we're not making the determination. I'm not the person who can say that 175 is equal to that 85. There are a lot of factors to be considered in that process, but DEP does that. All this legislation does is start the process so that there's a possibility of it occurring. It needs to go before DEP. I think eventually it needs to go before DCAM before it can be finalized and happened. But I think if we can extend the life of that landfill for 10 or 12 years, I think that helps our communities in the long run while we try to put together a long-term plan of what we're going to do. I see Fitchburg in this area really making strides in the volume of recycling that we're doing and educating people and all of those things. But we need to continue to do that. And it's just not Central Massachusetts. It's all over the Commonwealth that's shutting down landfills. It's all over this country that's shutting down landfills. And we need to take that seriously, and we need to address it long term.
Mr. Eubanks.
Definitely. I think that's one of the things that for Fitchburg, it's going to be a huge cost if we close that landfill, if we don't have it available. So I agree with you on that. It's something that's going to be, long term. Like you said, we have to really plan on that and really have access to the landfill. And I think it's a solution that could actually solve some of the problem. But like you said, it's not an end all. We still need to have that solution. Look at it broadly, because we don't, like you said, it doesn't, the landfill doesn't just support Fitchburg, but we'll probably end up paying the most money of it. So that's why we need to figure out how to do it so that it benefits Fitchburg, and that should be the priority for Fitchburg, to say, let's, how do we fix this? How do we have enough space for all the trash that comes in? But it also affects the other towns around you, so they also should be part of the planning. But yeah, definitely, I think it's something we need to continue to work on.
Issue 5, this year, Massachusetts enacted the so-called red flag law. One of the co-sponsors of that law, Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, is promising that she will be coming back to the legislature next session with more of what she calls new gun safety regulations, including a limit to the number of firearms an individual can purchase per year. Would you be open to voting in favor of further gun control laws, or do you believe the current laws in Massachusetts are enough? Mr. Eubanks.
So, I'm going to just go through the amendment. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So if you go by that, I'd say we can't infringe on our rights, and we should not. And that would be my vote, not to infringe any more on our rights. And I think I would have voted no for ERPO, as did Senator Trent.
Representative Hay.
I voted yes on ERPO, and while I believe in the Second Amendment, and I have many friends and relatives who are gun owners for a variety of reasons, for hunting, for sport shooting, and for their own personal protection, and I understand that and agree with that. I also think we need to take public safety put that into the equation, and when there are certain instances where I think it's appropriate and public safety overrides the Second Amendment with some of the types of guns and those types of things. In terms of Diaz's petition for the next session, I'd have to look at it. I do have some concerns about with her saying the number of guns that somebody owns. As long as they're the right and appropriate types of guns, law-abiding citizens should be able to have them. So I need to look at that. But I think public safety is something important. And on the ERPO and on the bump stock, which I know people had a different opinion than me on many of them. You know, I talked to the police chiefs. When the Massachusetts Association of Police Chiefs tells me that they think those bills are going to make our community safer, I have to listen to them. I was at something a while ago and somebody asked me the question of, you know, well, how many school shootings have we had in Massachusetts, and how many big, you know, random shootings have we had in Massachusetts? And the answer was none. Well, that's true. But maybe the answer is none is because we have good gun laws and good safety laws, and we need to continue to do that.
Issue 6.
Can I follow up on that?
Go ahead.
Just the issue with that is that there's no caveats in that law to help protect the person that has a mental issue. And when they walk away from the court taking their arms away, what happens? There's nothing to help them if they are mentally, have mental issues. There's nothing in the law to say, let me get you into a hospital, let me get you the support. So that does, you know, the way they wrote this law just does not help the person that you're trying to protect from themselves or from their guns. So that's why I think it shouldn't be, we should actually abolish that ERPO law.
So how do we deal
if I could respond to that. That was brought to me from people who had concerns about it. And I had a concern about that when the bill first came out. But I will tell you that the chair and the vice chair of the Mental Health Committee in the legislature actually came to me and asked me to not take that into consideration, because they thought that if somebody went through the courts with the ERPO to have guns taken away and was forced into getting mental health help, that was a stigma that they did not want to put on people. They're saying that, you know, the courts will advise and the courts can actually require that somebody go get help if they're going to keep their guns or they're going to give guns back to them after they've gone through that process. So I think that it's a delicate minefield for me.
Let me ask you, you brought up mental health issues.
Yep.
So where do you stand on access to mental health help? I mean, if someone says, well, if that judge says, well, you can go seek help. What if they can't afford health insurance? What if they can't afford that? Should everyone in the Commonwealth have access to health care, including physical and mental health, if they can't afford it? Should that be a right? I
think it should be a right. I mean, especially if people are hurting, they're in trouble, they have mental issues, they have problems. We should have some caveats there, especially if you're taking away your guns, and now you're not going to have any access to anything. You're already behind the 8 ball, because now you have to pay for an attorney, which you couldn't afford in the first place, and now your guns are taken away and you don't have an attorney to support you, and now you're not even going to get into the hospital. So if they're putting that in, they should actually allow them to get the mental health that they need. That should be included in that, and that's what they took out of the bill. That should be put back in.
So even taking the guns out of it, should access to health care be a right in the state? I
believe so. I believe that at least at minimum, mental health should be one of the pieces that you should include. Especially, I mean, we have a big suicide rate in this area. It's big, and we don't have the support that we need. So I think we need to be able to provide those individuals with support and access to mental health. And that should be, and maybe it should be a right. I mean, I know. As a Republican, sometimes you feel like, hey, you want to have that freedom to make the decision, but sometimes you got to look out a little bit for the people, and we're having a lot of mental issues. We have a lot of people committing suicide. We should have more support for them, and maybe it should be a right.
Representative Hay?
Absolutely. Health care and mental health care is a right, and it's something that the government has a responsibility to provide to people. If the national government were to override the Affordable Care Act, I am proud to say that the governor and both bodies in the legislature have said that in Massachusetts, we will make sure that the residents of our communities have access to health care, and I would like to make sure that mental health is part of that health care. I think mental health is one of the biggest issues that we have right now in terms of making sure that people get coverage and people have access to that care. I'm glad that it is coming out into the public. People are talking about it. We had a great state senator in Jen Flanagan, who is a big advocate for mental health and did a great job as a senator. And our delegation needs to continue to do that to make sure that people have access to it, because it is a disease and it's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's something that people need to be able to say, okay, this is what I have, this is how we're going to treat it, this is what's going to happen. There are plenty of people that I know that have mental health issues that are very productive members of our society on many different levels, and with the right medication and with the right doctors and the right help, they are quite high functioning members of our society, and we just need to make sure that everybody has that ability and that access.
Issue 6, question 1 on the November ballot would limit the ratio of nurses to patients. Nurses unions support it, saying it would provide better levels of care, while some hospitals oppose it, saying the cost could result in even more closures and rationed care. Where do you stand on question 1, Representative Hay?
Question 1. I am a yes on question 1. My reason is that it is being brought forward by the Mass Nurses Association, and those are the nurses who are in the trenches doing the day-to-day work with the patients. And when they tell me that their patient loads make it so that they cannot provide the appropriate service to their patients, it's something that we need to address, and that is very concerning to me. So I will vote yes on 1, and I hope that it passes. Now, having said that, I understand particularly small community hospitals will be adversely affected by it, and their budgets will have them making some hard decisions. I would hope that the legislature, if this gets passed, takes a look at it and can sit down with the nurses and can sit down with the small community hospitals and work on creating legislation that works for everybody, so that the hospitals can continue to provide the services and the nurses can feel comfortable with the patient limits that they have, so that they can provide the outstanding service that they do every day to all the patients that they have.
Mr. Eubanks.
So that's a really tough one. I talked to family members. I got family members on both sides of the issue. Nurses, I've worked in the field. I've been a CNA, and I know how hard it is when you don't have enough staff to support the people that you have on the floor. But once you look at all the details and the it's so prescriptive, it's going to really knock us down. We're going to have issues with hospital closures, which we're already having and dealing with. We're going to have even more of that, and I think the nurses are going to shoot themselves in the foot, in the sense that we don't have a big enough pipeline to fill the demand that we're going to need for the nurses too. So while I agree with the idea of having the nurse ratio be reduced, I don't think we can prescribe it as it's written in the current request that's being put out by the nurses right now, and you have both sides on the issue. So my view is that it'll close hospitals. It'll make it really impossible for us to have, especially the community hospitals. They're going to be hurt a lot more, and we really have to fight to keep the services that we have as it is. And on top of it, we're going to have the nurses, not enough nurses to provide the services that we also need. So I would have to vote no.
So no and yes on question 1. Issue 7, Mr. Eubanks, you support Massachusetts becoming a sanctuary state. Specifically, should local law enforcement cooperate with federal authorities on immigration issues?
I do believe that, being an immigrant, and I've gone through the whole process, and I've helped a lot of people with immigration issues, and we've done it here. I've worked with the Hmong Lao Foundation. I've worked with the Latino community in helping them obtain their citizenship and legal ways to maintain their status. I think the problem that I have with the sanctuary cities law is that the police are not going to be able to work with the immigration officers, and then what we'll have is, and I've seen this happen. I've seen it happen where you have the person that they're being prosecuted, they brought into court, and then immigration comes and picks them up and takes them away, and then they didn't serve their time, and 2 months later they're back here again. So I think there needs to be something that stops that from happening. And I'm not against the people that are here there's a lot of friends that I have that are here illegally, but they're abiding by the law, they're not committing crimes, and I just want the criminal to go to jail and get them out of the street. And if you tie the hands of the police, that's going to really make it harder for them to take that criminal off the street. And even immigrants are going to be happy with that, because I understand what the law is trying to do, but it's not really what its intent is not really what it's happening. It's really allowing people to just walk out the door and not be arrested by immigration, not be arrested by the local police, and you still have them on the street committing crime. And I've seen it happen. My daughter had somebody steal her identity, and then she is the one having to pay for the taxes of that individual that used her identity. So that's a hardworking individual that came here legally, and now somebody that's illegal is doing that, and they should go to jail for doing that.
Representative Hay.
We're a nation of immigrants. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody whose grandparents or great-grandparents or whomever did not come across on the boats to create our country. So we need to continue to be a nation of immigrants. We need to continue to be a nation that welcomes people. We need to continue to be a nation that says to those people who are in places where their lives are threatened and they can't live safely, that you can come to our shores and you can have protections. So in terms of immigrants, we are immigrants, and we need to continue to be. In regards to the sanctuary cities, my feeling was that I do not want Massachusetts, and I didn't think the legislature should vote to be a sanctuary state. I believe that that should be up to each individual city and town to determine whether they want to be a sanctuary town or they want to be a sanctuary city, and let the cities and towns make that decision instead of the state legislature making that decisions for them. I think there are many places where it's already happening and lots of cooperation is occurring, and in other places it's not. I know that part of it is the fact that, I don't think that the city police departments or the town police departments have an obligation or a responsibility to spend their manpower and their time doing the federal government's job. And that's one of the things that the federal government wants us to do with that. And I think that's wrong. Let the federal government do their job regarding immigration, and let the cities and towns do their jobs. They know their residents, they know their people.
Mr. Eubanks, closing statements, if we can keep it to about a minute or so.
About a minute, okay. So just want to wrap up. I think the priorities that we have, I'd love to represent the district and make a difference here in our cities and towns in Fitchburg and Lunenburg. I'm asking for your vote and for your support as we go into the elections in November. And that, look at my background. I've worked in economic development. I've worked with immigration. I've worked with all the issues that we're challenged with. And I think that I could bring to the table something new and new perspectives, and actually be able to work with the governor. I'm friends with our governor and our lieutenant governor, and I believe, and with our Senator Dean Tran, that we can work together to really bring back the resources back to the city, back to Fitchburg, and really make a difference in our community. And I ask for your vote and for your support today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eubanks. Representative Hay.
Thank you. For over 30 years, I've done public service, I've done community service, and I've served as an elected official. And when people ask me why I do those things, it's very simple, short, concise answer: because I want to do good. I think that's important. We all have an obligation and responsibility to do good in our communities and by our people. And when I drive west on Route 2, and the legislature has just increased funding for veteran services, just increased funding for our senior centers, passed bills that help pregnant women in the workplace, give them protections, passed bills that help families that are struggling with the opioid crisis, I think we have done good by the people of Massachusetts. And I hope to continue to do good by the people of Massachusetts. And that's why I'm asking for your vote on Tuesday, November 6th, to re-elect me as your state representative so I can continue to do good. Thank you.
State Representative Stephan Hay, the Democrat, incumbent, and challenger Elmer Eubanks Archibald, the Republican. The election is on November 6th. Covers the city of Fitchburg and Lunenburg Precinct B. And that concludes this debate in our debate series of Election 18 with the candidates for state representative. And we will be back in about a half hour with the candidates in the only televised debate for state senate between incumbent Republican Dean Tran and his challenger, Leominster City Councilor Susan Chalafu-Zephyr. So that's it for us. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye. Very good. Good job.
Thank you.